The stalker named Wade. I arrived at my uncle's cabin on a cold late autumn afternoon. The cabin stood isolated in a dense pine forest in rural Oregon, about 10 miles down a dirt road from the nearest town. My uncle was traveling in Canada for a few months and had asked me to look after the place for a while. I didn't think much of it, just saw it as a good opportunity to escape the noise of the city and find some peace for myself. The first day passed peacefully. I cleaned the dusty kitchen, arranged books on the shelves, and lit the long-unused fireplace. Everything seemed perfect until night fell around midnight. I was reading when I heard a small noise from the porch, like the sound of footsteps on dry leaves. I got up and looked through the window, but outside was only darkness and the swaying silhouettes of trees. Thinking it might just be a squirrel or some other woodland creature, I went back to my book, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. The next morning, when I stepped outside, I discovered strange footprints pressed into the damp earth near the steps. Human footprints, barefoot, clearly belonging to a man. I shivered but tried to reassure myself that it was probably a lost hunter or a local resident. However, I couldn't see any tracks indicating where the person had come from or where they had gone. The footprints were only present around the cabin, as if the person had circled it and then vanished. The second night, things got stranger. At about 2 a.m, I was half asleep when I heard a light tapping on the window pane. 3 steady taps. I shot up, my heart pounding. I stood motionless in the dark, not daring to approach the window. Then a whisper echoed, faint and drawn out, as if someone was calling my name on the wind. I peered through a crack in the curtains, but saw nothing, just the black shadows of the trees and swirling fog. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I called the local police, but they told me I was probably just imagining things, as the terrain there often created strange echoes. They promised to swing by on patrol, but I didn't feel reassured. The following evening, I decided to place a small voice recorder outside the window and set up my uncle's old camera in the living room, connected directly to my laptop. I didn't want to be seen as paranoid, but I needed to know what was happening. That night, I heard the footsteps again, slow, steady, the rustle of dry leaves, and a faint breath through the crack of the door. But this time, I didn't open the curtains. I just sat silently in the dark room, my hand clutching a kitchen knife, my eyes glued to the laptop screen. When I replayed the footage the next morning, my heart felt like it stopped. In the frame at 2:17 a.m., a man appeared outside the window. He stood there for a long time, doing nothing, just silently looking in, his head tilted slightly as if observing. He wore tattered clothes. His hair was long and matted, and most importantly, he had no shoes. I zoomed in on the image. His face was distorted, his eyes as empty as a bottomless pit. A line of text appeared on the wooden wall just behind him, written in some thick, dark substance. Wade is back. I had never heard that name before. I called my uncle immediately. His voice came through the phone, trembling. You have to get out of there now. Wade was my old neighbor. He used to live in the house on the other side of the woods. 10 years ago, he disappeared after being suspected of stalking and breaking into several homes. The police never found his body, but people say he didn't die. I didn't wait for him to finish. I packed my things and left the cabin that very morning. As my car turned off the dirt road, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing silently on the porch, watching me. Wade, the stalker in the shadows. After a long period of enduring work pressure in the city, I decided to accept my uncle's offer to look after his log cabin, located deep in the northern woods. It was an old, simple, but peaceful house, more than 20 kilometers from the nearest town. No phone signal, no neighbors. It was exactly the place I needed to get away from it all. The first few days, I found life in the forest to be gentle. I spent my time reading, walking through the tree-shaded trails, and taking beautiful pictures of nature. Everything was fine until the day I met Wade. Wade was a thin, middle-aged man with a thick beard and a perpetually vacant stare. I came across him while walking near the stream behind the house. Wade didn't smile, just stare at me as if trying to memorize every detail of my face. When I greeted him, he didn't respond, just gave a reluctant nod and turned away. I thought he was just a recluse living in the woods, perhaps a bit eccentric, so I didn't pay him much mind. But after that encounter, things began to change. The next morning, I found a small piece of paper tucked on the front door. On it was scrawled, "Don't sleep too deeply." No signature, no explanation. I felt uneasy. It could have been a mean-spirited prank, but in the woods, with no one else but me and nature, a note like that sent a chill down my spine. I told myself I was overthinking it, but in the following days, the notes continued to appear. One was left on my bedroom windowsill. "I saw you looking at me yesterday. I didn't like it." Another time, a piece of paper was stuck with pine resin to the bathroom mirror. "You shouldn't have come here. This house isn't for you." I began to feel genuinely unsafe. Every time I stepped outside, I had the feeling of being watched. I saw fleeting shadows behind trees, heard the snap of a twig just after I walked by. Wade. I was sure it was him. I tried driving down to town to report it, but no one knew much about him. The locals just said that Wade lived in isolation on the western slope of the mountain, had a history of mental illness, and communicated with almost no one. An old man whispered to me he had a brother who died 15 years ago in the very house you're staying in. I froze. I had never heard my uncle mention this. That night, I locked all the windows and placed a small knife by my bed, but sleep did not come easy. In the middle of the night, I heard very light footsteps on the porch, then something scratching at the wooden door. I held perfectly still, my heart racing. Then a hoarse laugh rang out, intermittent and insane. I knew it was Wade. The next morning, I went outside and saw words carved with sharp object into the wood of the front door. "You will die here too." I called my uncle, my voice trembling. He was silent for a moment, then said, "I didn't dare tell you. Wade was a close friend of your father. His younger brother stayed at my house for a while. They argued, and one winter night, the brother slipped and fell into the rocky ravine behind the house and died. Wade believes it was an accident." I didn't wait for anything more. I packed my things that morning, intending to leave the house forever. But when I opened my car trunk, I found one last piece of paper tucked into the door handle. "Did you think you could leave?" I looked around. The forest was suffocatingly silent. No one, no footsteps. But I knew he was still out there somewhere, watching me with those eyes, as if I were the one who had taken everything from him. I left that house. I never went back. But many nights later, when I look in the mirror in my city apartment, I still see a figure standing behind me. Its face unclear, but its frame thin, with eyes that seem to whisper, "I'm still here." The missing axe and the mystery of Wade. I arrived at the cabin in the woods alone in early October, when the leaves had turned a deep red and the air was thick with mist. The cabin was my uncle's property, a wonderful hideaway he often used for weekend retreats. This time, I was there to work remotely for a few weeks, away from the suffocating city. The first day passed peacefully. I cleaned the kitchen, chopped some firewood at the edge of the forest, and set my workspace by the window. Among my uncle's tools, I found an old but sharp axe, its wooden handle worn with time. I used it to split the wood, then stood up on the porch, leaning it against a post as people often do. The next morning, the axe was gone. I checked around the yard, then circled the house. No sign of a break-in. The door was still locked, with no prime marks. There were no new footprints besides my own from the day before. At first, I thought I might have misplaced it, but after a few hours of thorough searching, I was certain it had been taken. That night, I began to feel uneasy. Around midnight, I was awakened by a light tap on the living room window. 3 taps. Short, even, cold. I shot up, my heart pounding. Grabbing a flashlight, I tiptoed closer, pulling the curtain back slightly to look outside. No one was there, but what sent a chill down my spine was on the thin layer of condensation on the outside glass was a handprint, faint, as if freshly pressed there by warmth. I couldn't get back to sleep that night. The next morning, out on the porch, I found something hanging from the light fixture, a small piece of paper, the ink partially smeared by the morning dew. I only took back what belongs to me. I began to suspect someone was living nearby, perhaps a drifter, or worse, someone mentally unstable. I walked to the small nearby town, home to a few general stores and a local police station. I told the officer on duty, an old man named Hank, about the missing axe and suspicious signs around the house. When I mentioned it might be someone named Wade, as I seem to recall my uncle once mentioning an old neighbor by that name, Hank immediately looked at me, frowning. "Who did you say?" "Wade." I nodded. Hank shook his head slowly. "There's no one named Wade living around here. Not for at least 20 years. Where did you hear that name?" I explained that I thought my uncle had mentioned it, but I wasn't sure. Hank's tone grew more serious. Almost 25 years ago, there was an incident. A man named Wade lived alone in a shack on the other side of the lake. People said he wasn't right in the head. One day, his shack burned to the ground. They never found a body, but it was assumed he died in the fire. I shuddered. So maybe someone is pretending to be him? Hank just sighed. Could be. But a lot of people believe Wade never died. They say his ghost still haunts these woods, angry at being abandoned by the world. I left town with a heavy sense of dread. That night, I locked all the windows, closed the curtains, and placed a kitchen knife by my bed. I left the nightlight on and lay awake. Around 1 a.m., I heard soft footsteps on the porch. Not an animal, human footsteps. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped right outside the front door. Then, click, the doorknob slowly turned. I shot out of bed, my heart racing. By the time I reached the door, everything was silent again. But under the doormat on the porch, I saw a familiar object, the axe. Its wooden handle was dark, as if it had been soaked in water or something else. Tucked under the axe head was another piece of paper. You can't keep what isn't yours. I packed my things in the middle of the night, not daring to stay. As my car left the woods, I glanced in the rearview mirror and glimpsed a figure standing between two trees, tall, thin, motionless, holding a second axe. I never returned to that cabin. But sometimes, when the wind whistles past the window of my city apartment, I still think I can hear 3 steady taps from somewhere in the night. The taillights. The panic began on my 3rd night at the cabin in the woods. At first, everything seemed peaceful. I just wanted a break from the city, to find some personal space to rest after months of stress. But things started to go wrong when the axe I used to chop would suddenly vanish without a trace. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe I'd left it somewhere or accidentally dropped it while walking to the woods behind the house. But then, the strange signs began to appear. Knocks on the door in the middle of the night. Footsteps on the porch. Whispers so faint I wasn't sure if they were real or if my mind was making them up. Then the notes appeared. One was wedged in the doorframe. Another lay silently on my pillow. The handwriting was scrawled and distorted, as if written by a trembling hand, and the messages grew more and more frightening. "You are not allowed here. I want what's mine. I am watching you." On the 4th night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, a kitchen knife in my hand, my eyes glued to the front door. The wind howled through the forest, whistling through the cracks in the door. Then a sound rang out, soft but clear, like someone dragging something across the wooden floor. I couldn't take it anymore. A primal fear surged in my chest. I rushed into the bedroom, grabbed my backpack, stuffed my laptop and papers inside, and bolted for the car. I didn't care if it was nearly dawn or still dark. I just knew I had to get out of this place immediately. The car started right away. The headlights illuminated the small dirt road leading out of the forest. I slammed on the gas, the tires screeching over dry leaves and gravel. The wind rushed past the windows like the screams of the forest. I didn't dare look back. But then, in a strange reflex, as I neared the final turn before leaving the woods, I glanced in the rear-view mirror, and I saw him, in the bright red glow of the taillights, standing out against the thin mist. Wade was there, the man I had briefly glimpsed in the woods on my first day. He still wore the same faded jacket, his eyes as deep as hollow stones. But this time, in his hand was my axe, its blade reflecting the light with strange red hue, as if it had just been stained with fresh blood. He didn't chase me. He just stood there motionless, looking straight at me, a long, cold stare that seemed to pass through the mirror and pierce my chest. I accelerated. My car swerved through the turns, the rear wheels sliding on the mud. By the time I reached the main paved road, the sun was beginning to peek through the trees, but the chill was still lodged deep in my spine. I reported it to the police the next morning. They went to the cabin to investigate, but found no one. No footprints, no signs of break-in, and no axe. I told them about Wade. One officer looked at me, frowned, and asked, "Are you sure it was Wade?" I nodded. I saw him. He was standing right behind my car last night, holding the missing axe. The officer was silent for a moment. Then he said, his voice lowering, "Wade used to live in those woods about 20 years ago, but he disappeared. They never found a body, only his burned-out shack. Since then, no one has lived in that area." A cold dread washed over me. I never went back to that cabin. I sold the car, moved to a new apartment, and changed my phone number. I tried to erase every memory associated with those woods, but a part of me knew something unnatural had happened. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the streetlights cast faint shadows into my bedroom, I dream of him, Wade, standing there, in the blazing red light of the taillights, still holding the axe. And every time he whispers, "Did you think you got away?" The identical footprints. My best friend from college, Caleb, and I decided to spend the weekend at his family's cabin, nestled deep in the northern mountains. The place had belonged to his grandfather and was now used as a quiet retreat in the heart of the wilderness. We drove through winding mountain roads, arriving as the afternoon faded. The old log cabin appeared behind a row of pines, its roof covered in moss, with faint smoke drifting from a stone chimney. A sense of ancient, rustic reliability enveloped it. "No one's been here for over a year," Caleb said, fitting the key into the lock. "We'll have the whole forest to ourselves." Inside, a thin layer of dust covered the furniture and bookshelves. We did a quick cleanup, started a fire, and opened a few beers, savoring the feeling of being cut off from the world. That night, while sitting by the fireplace, Caleb told me some strange stories his grandfather used to mention, odd noises in the night, shadowy figures among the trees, and one thing I found particularly bizarre, identical footprints that would appear around the cabin after every snowfall. I laughed, thinking it was just a spooky story for fun. But Caleb was serious. My grandpa swore they were always exactly the same length, same depth, and they appeared in a weird circle around the house. We didn't discuss it further. It was getting cold, and after a few games of chess, we both went to bed. The next morning, I was the first one awake. When I opened the door to the porch, a blast of cold wind hit my face. A light snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the ground in a thin layer. But what made me freeze on the spot was this: the footprints. They were printed clearly in the white snow. Not just one, but dozens, arranged in a circle around the cabin, leading from the forest right up to the windowsill and then disappearing. Every print was identical. The size, the distance, the depth, as if stamped from a single mold. I called for Caleb. He ran out, stared intently for a moment, and said quietly, just like my grandpa said. We followed the tracks, but strangely, they only led a few feet before abruptly vanishing. No exit trail, no sign of anyone coming or going. Not a single step led back into the forest. "I don't like this," I said, my eyes still fixed on the suspicious circle of prints. The second night, we were more cautious. Caleb set up an alarm with tin cans and string around the porch. I set my phone to record a night vision video, pointing the camera at the window. Neither of us slept deeply. Around 2 a.m., I was startled awake by a soft clicking sound, as if someone was walking on the wooden porch. I looked over at Caleb. His eyes were open too. We said nothing, just listened. The sound stopped after about a minute. The alarm didn't go off. No one walked away. Absolute silence. The next morning, when we stepped outside, I saw that more snow had fallen. And again, the footprints had appeared. Still the same shape, the same position. A circle around the cabin. No sign of disturbance, no entry or exit. It was as if someone had emerged from the ground, walked around the house, and then sunk back into the snow without a trace. This time, Caleb was lost in thought for longer. I have a feeling Someone is testing us, seeing how we'll react. I tried to act calm, but inside, I was starting to panic. We checked the camera, but the video only showed silent darkness, not a single movement, as if the system had been tampered with, or there was something beyond our comprehension. On our last night, we decided not to sleep. We both sat in the living room, the firelight casting our tense shadows on the wall as we waited. Near 3 a.m., the footsteps returned, heavier this time. The window fogged over with condensation. Then, a handprint appeared on the mist from the outside. It had only 4 fingers, long and hooked. We burst outside with flashlights, but no one was there. Only the identical footprints remained, becoming clearer with each newly fallen snowflake. The next morning, we left the cabin without a word. On the way down the mountain, I looked in the rearview mirror, and though it could have been an illusion, I saw a figure standing motionless in the snow, and at its feet, the same identical footprints as always, arranged in a perfect circle, barefoot prints. We arrived at the cabin on a cold late autumn afternoon. It was an old house deep in the woods, belonging to the grandfather of Ellie, my girlfriend. He had passed away almost 10 years ago, and the cabin had been nearly abandoned since, only occasionally maintained to prevent decay. Ellie grew up in the city but had been here a few times as a child. She told me, "This place is so peaceful it's sometimes scary." I laughed, thinking she was exaggerating. To me, this was just a short vacation, a break from the city, my phone, and all the things that keep people stressed. It took us nearly 2 hours to clean the cabin. Everything was covered in dust, the smell of old wood and faint mildew lingering in the air. As the sun set, we sat by the fireplace, drinking hot cocoa and telling each other old stories. Outside, the forest grew dark, and the first winds of the season made the roof creak. Around midnight, when I woke up to use the bathroom, I looked out the kitchen window. On the thin, frost-covered ground, I saw something unusual. I rubbed my eyes, looked closer. Yes, footprints, not boot prints, nor animal tracks. They were human footprints, bare, clearly imprinted on the cold ground. And not just one. There were at least 24 footprints circling the house, evenly spaced, as if someone had walked in a large circle around the cabin over and over. I opened the door, my flashlight beam sweeping across the ground. The prints weren't large, about the size of an adult's. But the strange thing was they were all identical. Each print had the same shape, the same stride, the same depth, as if someone had used a mold to create them. I woke Ellie up. She came outside, pulling her robe tightly around her as the biting cold seeped through. "It must be a joke," she whispered. "Someone walked barefoot around the house, then just disappeared? On damp, cold ground like this? Leaving no tracks into the woods and no tracks back." We looked at each other, then went back inside, locking the windows and the front door securely. I couldn't get back to sleep. Lying there, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks and the sound of branches scraping against the roof, I felt as if I was being watched. The next morning, I checked the footprints again. They were still there, clearer now as the daylight cast shadows into the deep grooves of each step. I took a picture with my phone, then followed a line of prints that led away from the house. They didn't lead into the woods. They just vanished. After the last step, there was nothing, no path, no broken grass, no disturbed soil. It was as if the person had evaporated from the face of the earth. By the afternoon, Ellie started saying strange things. "I heard knocking last night," she said. "Very soft. 3 taps. I thought you went outside and were knocking for fun, so I didn't say anything." I confirmed I hadn't left the bed. The second night, we stayed up later. The fire was kept burning continuously, as if the flames could ward off the growing sense of dread. Ellie placed a small wind chime on the door, and I wedged a chair against the wooden door, though I knew it wouldn't do much if someone was really outside. Around 1 a.m., we heard footsteps on the wooden porch. Slow, steady, not rushed, not trying to be hidden. Ellie gripped my hand, her face pale. I signaled for her to be quiet. The footsteps stopped. Then came the sound of breathing, very close, as if someone were standing on the other side of the door, their face pressed against the wood. I held my breath. A minute passed, then 2, No knocking, no sound. We didn't dare open the door. The next morning, besides the old footprints, there were new ones. Still the same bear prints, still identical, but this time they were arranged in 2 concentric circles, as if someone had walked around the house twice during the night. I decided we would leave as soon as the sun was fully up. While packing, I discovered a small piece of paper blown by the wind and stuck under the windowsill. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting crooked. You'll be leaving prints like them soon enough. We left the cabin at noon. As the car started to roll, Ellie looked through the rear window and let out a small gasp. I looked too. On the ground in front of the cabin, a new set of footprints had just appeared, even though no one had stepped out, and all of them were still identical. The scratching at the door. After a long day of hiking and exploring the dense western forest, my best friend from college, Min, and I returned to the cabin, isolated in the valley. It was a place we had rented for a few days' retreat. The cabin was built of rough pine logs and sat in a quiet clearing, far from phones, traffic, and people. That evening, we grilled meat over wood fire, drank beer, and reminisced about old times. The air was cool, and a mountain breeze blew through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of damp leaves and young pine. Everything seemed perfect, unbelievably peaceful. But that night, things began to change. Around 2 a.m., I was half asleep when I was awakened by a strange sound. At first, it was just a very light creak, like the floorboards being stepped on. I opened my eyes and listened intently. 1, 2, 3 slow footsteps echoed from the porch. The wooden floor groaned softly with each step. I shot up and looked at Min. He was also awake, looking back at me. Neither of us said a word. We both heard it. The footsteps stopped right outside the main door. The wind died down, silencing the rustling trees. The insects fell silent. There was only absolute quiet and our choked breaths in the darkness. Then, suddenly, scrapey, a light scratching sound came from outside, like fingernails or a sharp object being dragged down the wooden door. I felt a chill run down my spine. The scratching continued, rhythmic, slow, persistent, as if someone was trying to evoke fear in the person inside. Min silently pulled out his phone, but there was no signal here. I reached for the small flashlight I kept by the bed and aimed it at the door. The weak light was only enough to illuminate half the room, but we didn't dare open the door or get any closer. The scratching stopped after a few minutes. Then the footsteps returned, this time moving past the window and around to the back of the house. We didn't sleep again that night. We just sat in silence, listening to every tiny sound in the thick darkness. The next morning, as soon as it was light, we went outside to check. The ground was covered in a thin layer of mist, which still held the imprints of bare feet, not our boot prints. There was no trail leading to or from them, only bare footprints, circling the porch and in front of the door. What made both of us shudder was this. The footprints were all identical. Same size, same length, and printed in a circle as if the person had been walking around and around the cabin all night. Min's voice trembled. Who would walk barefoot in this cold forest? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure it was a person. We discussed packing up and leaving early, but the car was parked in a clearing almost 500 meters away. The forest path was rough and slippery, not to mention we had no signal to call for help. That afternoon, we tried to reinforce the door latch and added a wooden bolt to the inside. I pushed the table against the main door and placed a small bell on the doorknob. If someone touched it, at least we'd hear a warning. We tried to keep our spirits up, but as night fell, the fear returned. Around 3 a.m., the footsteps began again. This time, it wasn't alone. There were 2, 3, then 4 sets of footsteps, overlapping each other, circling the house, moving closer to each window frame. No one knocked. No one called our names. Only the sound of soft, steady damp breaths, as if they didn't come from living lungs. The scratching started again, this time at the back of the house. Then on the left, then at the main door. Faster, harder, as if something, or many things, were trying to get in. Min was on the verge of panic. He began to cry silently, both hands clutching a small paring knife. I stood motionless, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. The door vibrated with each scratch, and then finally, everything suddenly stopped. Silence. Complete. We waited for several more hours until the first light of dawn seeped through the window cracks. At that moment, we didn't hesitate for a second. Packing quickly, our backpacks not even zipped up, we burst outside and ran towards the car. As the car pulled away from the forest, I glanced one last time in the rear-view mirror, and I saw it. A figure standing on the porch, motionless, its hand still lightly scratching the closed door. Fleeing in the dark. We couldn't endure another night in that cabin. After 2 consecutive nights of being tortured by footsteps, scratching, and strange bare footprints, both men and I were in a state of mental exhaustion. We didn't know who or what we were facing, but we both felt it was getting closer, stronger, and had no intention of stopping. As darkness fell on the 3rd day, the sky was a flat gray without a moon or stars, and the wind shrieked like a lament through the trees. The small cabin trembled like a dying creature. Men whispered, "We can't stay here. If we wait until morning, I don't think we'll leave this place alive." I nodded. No more proof was needed. The plan to escape was decided right then. But the car was still parked nearly 500 meters away, in the clearing at the start of the forest trail. The narrow, dark path we had to cross, the same path where the bare footprints had circled. We packed everything in silence, but didn't take much. We each wore a light backpack and carried a flashlight. I gripped a folding knife in my hand. It was only a psychological comfort, but at that moment, anything sharp was an anchor. We crept out the back door and slipped onto the trail behind the house, avoiding the main path, the one it usually circled each night. The forest was pitch black, our flashlights only illuminating a small patch of ground ahead. Our panicked footsteps on dry twigs and dead leaves made sounds as brittle as breaking bones. Then suddenly, snap, a sound to our left. I raised a hand to signal men to stop. We stood frozen, our hearts hammering in our chests. Another set of footsteps, not ours, was approaching. Slow, dragging. I turned back, saw nothing, but then the flashlight beam swept to the right, and I saw a figure, standing motionless between 2 trees, barefoot, head bowed, its entire body black as if blending into the shadows. Only its 2 pale white feet stood out against the damp earth. I didn't have time to scream. I grabbed men and pulled him into a run. We bolted through the darkness like madmen, not caring about direction, only about getting away. We slipped, stumbled, and ran into branches, our faces getting scratched, but neither of us stopped. The footsteps behind us continued. Not fast, not hurried, but relentless. It knew we were afraid, and it was playing with that fear. After nearly 10 minutes of running blindly through the forest, we suddenly saw a light, faint but clear, to our right, behind a dense row of trees. The sound of an engine, a yellow glow. I screamed, "A car! Someone's there." We scrambled toward it, crossing a ditch and thorny bushes. As we got closer, we realized it was a large truck parked on the side of the trail. The driver, a man in his 40s with a sun-weathered face, stepped out, holding a cup of hot coffee. He looked bewildered to see us burst out of the woods like 2 ghosts. "What's going on? What are you 2 doing out here at this hour?" I was too out of breath to speak, managing only a few stammered words. There's something chasing." The driver didn't ask any more questions. He must have seen the sheer terror in our eyes. He opened the truck door and urged, "Get in." As the truck roared to life, I turned and looked back. In the rear-view mirror, among the distant thickets, I saw a figure standing silently, a hand resting on a tree trunk, as if observing. Its 2 bare feet were caked in mud, its head still bowed, as motionless as a statue. On the way back to the nearest town, the driver gave us a bottle of water and a thin blanket. He didn't ask much, only said, "It's not the first time I've picked up people running from those woods. Some people say there used to be an orphanage back in there before it burned down. For decades now, no one's dared to live near the place." We said nothing. No one wants to believe in ghosts. But some things can't be explained with words. We only knew that, if not for that truck that night, we might never have made it out of those woods.